Welcome back, guys. We have some more things to talk about in terms of information that has come out about how Xbox runs their business, specifically on exclusivity and revenue splitting for games that are sold on the Xbox store, the Xbox ecosystem. So first of all, as we know, exclusivity is always a massive talking point when it comes to games. It seems like the scrutiny for exclusivity is always hotter on Xbox games, whereas Nintendo and PlayStation, nobody really bats an eye when it comes to exclusivity. At least recently with the acquisitions of Bethesda, there's always been the outrage specifically for games like Starfield. And as we recently just found out, for a game like Indiana Jones being exclusive on the Xbox platform. But there is one person at the end of the day that has the final say on whether a game goes exclusive, and that person is Phil Spencer. And this was confirmed by Matt Booty. It says here, Xbox Game Studios lead Matt Booty was one of the key witnesses in today's evidentiary hearing, and his testimony outlined a general understanding of the Xbox business. Testimony from the Xbox Game Studios head confirms that Xbox's CEO Phil Spencer has the final say on game exclusivity. And when it comes to the decisions of exclusivity, they aren't cut and dry. It's not all games will be exclusive or everything is going to be multi-platform. Obviously, we've seen that there are multiple different decisions that are made. There are certain games that are first-party Xbox games that would make more sense to be multi-platform, like Minecraft, like Elder Scrolls Online, like the upcoming Call of Duty that potentially will be a first-party Xbox game. Those make a lot more sense as they have established player bases across all of the different platforms to stay multi-platform. But then there are other games like a Starfield, which is a brand new IP, and an Indiana Jones, which again is also a brand new game, to stay exclusive to the Xbox ecosystem to try and drive more growth specifically within the Xbox ecosystem. And Matt Booty also comments on this. He says here, in terms of waiting up until a game's release to decide whether a game is exclusive, he says those decisions need to be made early on. And it's difficult to make that sort of change late in production. One of the things when it comes to Indiana Jones is that it was supposed to be a multi-platform game, obviously before Bethesda was purchased, but after the acquisition, they decided to make it exclusive. And that means that Indiana Jones, this decision was made very early on in its development, even though they changed it from being multi-platform to exclusivity. Matt Booty also says here, there's a time when that's feasible and a time up until in which it is not, in terms of exclusivity decisions being revisited. And Pete Hines here says, well, Pete Hines was questioned. It says, while questioning ZeniMax's head of publishing, Pete Hines, FTC's Flurry notes that Machine Games' new Indiana Jones game, Project Relic, was originally in development for multiple consoles. And this was the same thing with Starfield. Obviously, Starfield was going to be multi-platform before Bethesda was purchased, but Xbox came in, purchased it, and years later, they are releasing it only exclusively for the Xbox ecosystem. But that decision was obviously made right after that purchase was finalized. There's no way they waited until the last second to decide to take Starfield off of the PS5. And in fact, we did see the exclusivity banner on Starfield years before at I believe it was the 2021 Xbox showcase, where they did say Xbox exclusive. So exclusivity with Xbox is on a game-to-game basis, but as they have been saying from the very beginning, all of the new games are going to be wherever Xbox Game Pass is, but established and legacy IPs will stay multi-platform. You'll always see Elder Scrolls Online on PlayStation. You'll always see Minecraft on PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, all that type of stuff. And Call of Duty, you should always see it on PlayStation, but you never know. This entire thing with the FTC, this entire thing with the Activision Blizzard acquisition and PlayStation's pushback and essentially them lying about saying that Call of Duty would destroy the PlayStation platform, could end up changing the way that Xbox decides to go about it. I mean, it's very doubtful because the business ROI would make no sense, I believe, when you have so many players already out there on the PlayStation platform playing the game. Specifically, it's like their biggest revenue maker. So who knows what's going to happen. But then there's also the thing that we did see about PlayStation not wanting to give the information about the PS6, which is supposed to be coming out in 2028, give that information over to Activision if this deal goes through. So this could all be bluffs. This could all be just kind of threats, I would say, because I believe by 2028, some of this will have smoothed out and PlayStation will realize how much money that they would be missing out on if they don't cooperate with Activision. And I feel like they will still give over the information about PS6 so that they can optimize the game and make it as good on PlayStation as it is on the other platforms out there. Now, when it comes to the actual revenue splits, this is something that I don't believe was supposed to come out, but apparently they let it slip. This is from Tom Warren here on Twitter saying FTC's counsel just let slip that Microsoft agrees to a 80-20 revenue split on some Xbox games instead of the typical 70-30 split. And this is something that Sarah Bond says, saying where we believe it was critical to get that content. So for specific games, they will take less of that revenue, and you can take a guess of the type of games that would be. I'm guessing like a Call of Duty, they would potentially take less revenue. Games that sell extremely high numbers, they'll probably have less bargaining power and they'll take the smaller revenue split. And this is always a discussion that comes up, the revenue split. Is it fair 70-30 for, especially for smaller developers, for indie games? The one thing that we have seen throughout the industry is you've had companies like Epic Games come in and try to disrupt that with their 88-12 revenue splits. So overall, Xbox looks at certain games that demand more in terms of gamers wanting to play it, and they will most likely make that 80-20 revenue split. The question here is, we do understand that Call of Duty and PlayStation had a special agreement. What was that agreement? Was it 80-20? Maybe that's kind of what they are hinting at here. And Microsoft and Xbox potentially agreed to that revenue split as well with Call of Duty, so that, I mean, Call of Duty, because it is the top selling game every year, has a lot of leverage over these platforms. So that was interesting. And I don't even think that was something that really was supposed to come out. We have this. Let's talk about some cloud gaming. It was revealed in the FTC versus Microsoft hearing that they had been working on separate SKUs for cloud gaming. Right now, to get cloud gaming, you have to be subscribed to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. But apparently, they say here that they have been working on dedicated xCloud SKU that was different to the Game Pass Ultimate. Now, there are a couple of things here with cloud gaming that we know Microsoft potentially could be working on in order to expand the reach of it, like Project Keystone, which would be that streaming box, which I'm surprised hasn't been announced yet. From what we last understood was that they were going back to master the software of it, and they weren't happy with the original software within the box itself, so that's why it hasn't released yet. We've seen the box in the background of Phil Spencer. I was convinced that they were going to announce it at the Xbox showcase, but that obviously didn't happen. So maybe that thing is scrapped, or maybe they are waiting to have a different dedicated SKU for cloud gaming to launch it. Who knows what is going on with that, but we do see cloud gaming expanding everywhere, especially as they've expanded out to things like just the smart TV app on those Samsung TVs. And then we also have heard about them really wanting to expand out and make their mobile store, which is why this acquisition is so important to them. Maybe they're going to be adding in something specific for the Xbox mobile store, if that actually ever does come to fruition, which will be different than the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription. Because I'm assuming that if they were to ever actually release a mobile dedicated store to compete with Apple and Google, you're not going to have the same subscription to get access to that as you would for the people on console and PC. I don't really think that would make any sense, as a lot of these games you can just download and play them for free already. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they add in cloud streaming there for phones that just can't run certain games. Like if you look at games like Call of Duty Warzone and Call of Duty Mobile, and then even Diablo Immortals, maybe some phones just don't run those as well, and the cloud would help improve that experience. But they were working on a dedicated xCloud SKU last year, and that could potentially be scrapped, or they're maybe shifting their focus to something else. Now, the last thing I do want to talk about doesn't have to do with this acquisition. It has to do with Starfield. Todd Howard talked about Starfield, and there's a lot of information on there, but specifically he explains why Starfield is at 30 frames per second and says it will feel great on the Xbox Series X and S. And here's what he says: we never looked at taking features away. Our focus is on delivering all of that. Ultimately, we boil it down to we wanted the consistency. The game is running great, but we don't want players to ever think about it. We have obviously seen other games that have performance modes, but we lean towards consistency. We're feeling really great. The game feels great in your hands. And I would say developers know this, but there are things that you can do to make that look and feel great. Things like motion blur, how fast the game refreshes or reacts to a controller input, all of those things matter in something feeling great. And I can honestly say this is the best feeling game that we've had. Now, I think it's really important to hear whether he's telling the truth. We will see once the game is released, but I do agree there is a difference between a 30 FPS in a game that doesn't have these things to make it feel good, and then a game that does. And Starfield, from what we have seen so far in the gameplay, looks like it will feel great in your hands. And the entire 30 FPS debate thing with these consoles is coming back into the spotlight, and I think for a good reason. I am now leaning towards the fact that unless they can utilize a lot more of these RDNA 2 things, of these different tool sets that they apparently have available to them, like fidelity effects, and utilize those things in a very efficient way, we're going to start seeing a lot more 30 frames per second games on these consoles for completely next generation games. And that will be probably the better way to play these games. And we are just seeing right now with Final Fantasy 16 being released, they do have a performance mode. That is a fact. However, from the Digital Foundry analysis and other analysis out there, we're seeing something very interesting. And I think we can look at Final Fantasy 16 and see why Todd Howard and his creative vision of having the game run consistently so that you're not pulled out of immersion, why he went with that choice. One of the main things that they said with the Digital Foundry tech analysis of Final Fantasy 16 was when you're in combat, the game actually is at 60 FPS. And then as soon as you drop out of combat, you get stuttering, you get inconsistent frames, and you can feel that. But when you're in combat at 60 FPS, one thing that is for sure, which they even zoomed in and showed, was that the image quality just bottoms out and the resolution bottoms out, and sometimes even hits like 720p, and you can notice that, and that takes away from the immersion of the game. You can tell here with Todd Howard, based off of the game that he is making with Starfield, with everything being just so detailed, he doesn't want to take away that immersion, which is why they went with the 30 frames per second. So there won't be the muddied image quality, and hopefully there won't be the huge drop in resolution that we are seeing with games like Final Fantasy 16. So that's why it makes more sense now in my head about the 30 FPS, especially after the Final Fantasy 16 thing. And I think that's kind of going to be a way that we're going to have to see that choice being made by developers going forward, unless something drastically changes. It's drop that resolution down so low that you get out of the immersion, and the immersion kind of goes away for parts of the game, reduce that image quality, or keep the image quality high and keep the frames at 30 frames per second. On a big 4K TV, you will absolutely notice when a game drops to 720p or that image quality gets all muddy. You won't notice nearly as much, I would say, the 30 frames per second if it's the only way that you're going to be able to play that game. If you're switching back and forth between 30 and 60, sure, you'll notice it. But if it's the only option is 30 frames per second, at least you'll have a clear 4K picture. We'll see what happens. Again, when it comes to performance modes, Xbox and Starfield, they could have went the way of just unlocking the frame rate and launching it at a 60 frames per second performance mode, and just avoided all of the backlash of leading up to the release of the game, people talking about 30 frames per second. But we know as soon as that game was released, we would have seen all the tech analysis dunking on the fact that it wouldn't even probably be staying anywhere near a consistent 60 frames per second. So right now it seems like they've made the right choice, but we'll have to wait and see how it actually feels in our hands. And if it feels good, it is one of those games that it can get away with 30 frames per second if it has that highly detailed image quality that we should be expecting from Starfield. But I will leave the video there, guys. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. If you are new, hit that subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.